Hello, you join me for some more post-processing. This is another picture from the shoot that I did at St Cwyfan's Church in the Sea. You'll find it on my channel as video 001. And if you want to know how I approach this sort of thing, rather than me do a big long preamble on the start of every one of these clips, just look at video 002 and that'll kind of give you an insight into where I'll be going with this. So with that said, let's get on and do some processing. So I hit develop. As you can see, it doesn't look much. I've pretty much exposed for the sky on this one, but there is plenty of detail in those shadow areas that we're going to be pulling out. So first thing we're going to do is my standard preset. What that's going to do is sort out the white balance, the lens correction and chromatic aberration, so we're ready to crack on. Let's start with a look at our basic panel. Temperature looks okay, I'm going to leave that. It's a sunset, so I'm just going to give it a hint of magenta, not much at all, just a little hint of magenta. Okay, the exposure, now as you can see we've got two big lumps of colour here on our histogram. Obviously this is the sky and then this is the darker areas. Now I will be probably pulling up the exposure a little bit, but I tend to come back to that, so we'll do the other stuff first. So the first thing we'll do is take those highlights right down, and now let's recover those shadows, and there we are. That's the detail that I was looking for. And you'll see now the histogram is no longer clipped at the black end, so just give it some whites, not too much. As I've mentioned before on these post-processing videos, I tend not to simply hold the Alt key and push it right up until we reach the clipping point. And you see the blacks, there's very little room to maneuver there before they clip. Doesn't matter too much, just a slight clip. That's fine, I don't mind that at all. A little bit of clarity and a little bit of contrast. Again, not too much, because other things that we're going to be doing later will come into play. So we want to try and make something of the colour in the sky, so we're going to push up the vibrance, but as you can see this area here now is starting to get a sort of dirty yellow colour, so just going to pull the overall saturation back down just a little bit, and you'll see how we make something of the sky later on. So that all looks good. Let's just zoom in there. Not too much noise, but there is a smidgen. So where are we? Detail. And we'll just put some luminance noise reduction in to about 30 or thereabouts. That'll do. I just noticed while I'm zoomed in there's a little, I think this is a longish exposure. What's my exposure time? It's a 40th of a second. That might be a passing seagull. So we'll just come in there and get him out of the picture. Right, that's that done. Back to the basic panel. Let's just have a look at our exposure. I want to just bring it up a little bit, not too much. One thing I do notice sometimes with sunset pictures is that, I'm not talking about the sky, but what the rest of the picture is. In this case it's a church and some boulders. You often see that the foreground and the midground can be quite light in pictures, and when I took the picture it was actually quite dark. Now I want to be able to kind of make out the detail, but at the same time, you know, I don't want it up here and then a really dark evening sky, which looks ridiculous. So I'm just going to leave it about there. I think that'll do me. I will put a grad filter on that sky, and I'm not going to hold the Alt key because I want it to slope. Let's just pull that down, and we can pull our exposure down. That's much more like what I was seeing when I was there. We can give just the sky a little bit more magenta, again not too much. With the tint sliders, really you don't need to travel very far with them. But I'm going to just saturate it ever so slightly, and I also just often add a little bit of dehaze to the sky. You can see how it's brought those colours out already. We just look at the before and after we're getting somewhere. Okay, so I'm happy with all that for that filter. We'll close that up. We're pretty much dealt with the basic panel. No sharpening here, that'll be done in Photoshop. What we are going to do is just have a little play with the colour balance and saturation on the individual colours. I'm going to move the orange over towards red a little bit, yellow over towards orange. It's kind of like playing with a graphic equalizer, if anybody's old enough to remember those things. So that will do that. A little bit of purple, magenta across to red. It's just emphasising those pinks and the red tones in the sky. And you notice we don't have too much of that washed out, nasty amber colour that sometimes gets pulled out of the sky there. So on the saturation front, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the selector here. Click on this little tool and it allows you to pick a colour and work just on that colour. When we push that up, you'll see it's predominantly orange. There's a little bit of red in it, and that's, I don't want to go too far. That'll do. That looks good. I'm quite happy with that. And with the luminance, what I'm going to do with that is just again select the same colour area, but pull the luminance down. And what that does is it emphasises the colour a little bit. It doesn't, obviously it's not saturating it, but it just gives it just a tiny little bit more emphasis. We're not too far off there. I quite like that. As I mentioned, this area down here, in a lot of pictures you'd see that really quite bright, and it just looks wrong when, you know, clearly this is a shot where the sun has set. It's probably about half an hour after sunset, and so the objects that are in the picture, to the naked eye when you're there shooting, they're not very bright. You know, it's getting dark fast. So, you know, I don't really want it any brighter than that. And that kind of works for me. In fact, I think we're not too far off there as far as Lightroom's concerned. One last thing, I know it's cheesy, I don't care, it's my picture, I can do what I want. I'm going to put a vignette on it, and you'll see I put quite a strong one on there. Just let it settle down and render itself properly. Now I'm going to feather it back. That's good. That'll do me nicely. Okay, so we're pretty much done with Lightroom for this picture. And what we're going to do now is just edit in Photoshop. I'm not passing this across to Photoshop as a smart object because I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be using the raw data. Okay, so here we are. We've got it open in Photoshop. The first thing I'm going to do is just put a curves adjustment layer on there, and I'm going to pick the red channel, and I'm just going to boost up those reds. That's ridiculous. Let's just dial that back a bit. Don't want it too much at all. One of the problems, it's a really good PC, this. Actually, it's not a PC, it's a Mac, but it's pretty good, but sometimes it does lag a little bit. So we've just pushed up those reds just a little bit. I think that looks really good, but you'll see down here now everything's taken on this red hue, and we definitely don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the mask that's automatically applied when you create a new adjustment layer, and I'm just going to go to Image, Apply Image, and create an Apply Image mask. Okay, and that's masking out this foreground. There is a, when you look at this, if I just hold down the Alt key and we look at our mask, you'll see this mid-tone grey is allowing some of the red, but it's dialing it right back. So it's not making everything look a ridiculous pink colour, but there would still be some warm tones in it because some of the light reflecting off the sky, of course, has got some red in it. So what I'm going to do is just go back to this here, and you'll see now the histogram, select the red one. Now the histogram for the red is right over here, mid-tones across to highlights. And I'm going to grab my point selector and just pull it up there like that. That's good. I just want to dial back the midtones a little bit so I get a slightly more selective curve. That's it. That'll do it nicely. So what we've done by doing this is this area here has been impacted very little in terms of the red. This side wall of the church, though, is a highlight area, and so that will be showing that slight adjustment. It's slightly pinker than it was without it, and I'll show you just by switching that off. You'll see, and of course the sun is set over here to the right of the picture, so you would expect some red, purple light, maybe a bit of orange to be on this side wall. It's whitewashed, so again you'd expect that colour tone to be reflected in it. But you'll see that I've avoided anything ludicrously HDR because, you know, if I made it all bright red, it just screams Photoshop a mile off. You can tell any sunset type picture. Yes, you can see that some have to be processed to really get the best out of them. But if you go bonkers and try and create colours that just simply weren't there and couldn't be there, unless you're very, very skilled at Lightroom and Photoshop, it just looks silly. So I'm pretty happy with that. So last thing I'm going to do now is I'm just going to duplicate that layer, pull it up to the top, and you'll see, of course, it's just hidden everything I did. Don't worry about that. We're just going to go to image adjustments, make that black and white layer. Okay, then we'll apply a high pass filter. Let's have a look. Okay, that's far too much. 5 pixels. I'm thinking about 3 pixels would do it. Yeah, that looks much better. So we'll okay that and change the blend mode to overlay. That just gives us a nice little bit of sharpening, and just switch it off so it just picks out the detail in the foreground and in this wall. So now clearly this is never in a million years going to be what you might even hint at being a portfolio picture. It's not getting printed, it's not going to any sort of competition, so I'm not too worried about the detail in it in terms of brushing in extra highlights and all that sort of stuff. It's just a very quick walkthrough. It's a nice enough picture. I'll enjoy looking at it in years to come, but I think that's the best we're going to be able to do with this for now. It was a very difficult evening actually, because the sunset light you see here is as good as it got entire evening, so I was lucky to get anything out of it really. So thanks very much for joining me. The next video is another location shoot. Next time we're across in Snowdonia. I pop across from where I live on Anglesey, about half hour's drive into the mountains. So join me for that if you can, and thank you very much for watching. Take care.